Welcome to the Live Unrestricted podcast, a show where you'll learn how to heal your relationship with food and your body so that you can focus your time and energy on more important things like your personal growth. I'm your host, Sabrina Magna, food freedom coach, and my mission is to help make your life happier and healthier without stress, overwhelm, or guilt about food. If you love the show, please do go out and share it. And if you're looking for support with your relationship with food, details about my programs are in the show notes. Thanks for spending time with me today. Now let's jump in. Welcome back to the show, my friends, and Happy New Year if you're listening to this in real time. This episode is getting released on January 4th, 2023. So if you are listening to this in real time, then this is just a reminder that as the new year rolls around, you are going to get bombarded with new year, new me, weight loss resolutions online. You will get bombarded with ads from Noom and Weight Watchers trying to convince you to get back on the wagon and making you feel guilty about the foods that you ate over the holidays. So it is very natural for you to feel that pressure to start a new diet or to restrict or cut back or start cutting out foods in January. But just remember how that pattern has gone in the past. Remember how the yo-yo diet cycle starts with restriction and with this desire to lose weight. And we always know how that results in just more cravings, more binging, and that weight coming back. So if right now you are looking for ways to improve your health, improve your well-being in 2023, and you don't want to diet anymore, but you don't know what else to do, I want to invite you to sign up for my free 7-day intuitive eating challenge that actually starts tomorrow on January 5th, 2023. It's going to be a 1-week live event filled with live group coaching calls with me, trainings, worksheets, and a private Facebook group with hundreds of other women on the same journey as you to find food freedom and heal their relationship with food and their bodies so that you can move into 2023 with a positive relationship with food. You can eat without guilt, obsession, or constant fear of losing control. So to sign up, you can head to the link that's going to be posted in the show notes, sabrinamagna.com/challenge. The fun starts tomorrow, so you do not want to miss out. So I cannot wait to see you on the inside. Now, moving on to today's topic. So if you're anything like me, when I was at my rock bottom with food, you know that you can't keep living this way, feeling anxious every time you eat, mentally or actually counting every single calorie or carb gram you're eating. I know for me, when I was really at my lowest, I was anxious at the thought of going out to eat with friends. I was counting every single calorie I ate into my Fitness Pal. And I remember knowing that I couldn't keep living this way. But the thought of letting go of that control, the thought of letting go of the micromanaging everything that I was eating was almost as terrifying as the thought of living this way for the rest of my life, because I truly did not trust myself to eat without the rules and the control and the restrictions. Every time I had done that in the past, I always had this all or nothing mentality. So the second that rules went out the window, it was like, screw it. And I would just eat everything in sight. And because I speak to women every single day who are at their own diet rock bottom and they have heard about intuitive eating, it really resonates with them. But there's fears that hold them back from really committing to ditching the diet mentality and doing the work needed to fully heal their relationship with food. Starting your intuitive eating journey can lead to feeling these different fears. You might feel the fear of failure, the fear of losing control, the fear of weight gain, fear that you'll never eat healthy, only eat junk food, become unhealthy, and your mind starts creating this terribly awful future riddled with diseases and weight gain and unhealthy habits. So if right now you feel like you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, you cannot keep dieting and living this way, but you're also terrified of intuitive eating and losing control, I want to just validate what you're feeling. And if you are feeling this way, I totally understand where you're coming from. There's likely been this pattern that you've experienced in the past when you've stopped dieting, that every time you've gone off the wagon, you've just totally lost control and eaten all the foods and gained the weight back and felt lethargic, low energy, just felt really bad in your skin. And so it's absolutely understandable that you're feeling this fear and that intuitive eating might sound really good for you, but there's so many things that are holding you back. Sometimes on a journey with a disordered relationship with food or negative body image, we can feel like we're the only person that feels this way. But 65% of women ages 25 to 45 have disordered eating, and another 10% have clinically diagnosed eating disorders. So that is 75% of women who are struggling with disordered eating. And that's not counting the people who are misdiagnosed or don't seek treatment, don't talk about this stuff. When I was struggling, I didn't talk about it because I was so ashamed and I didn't think anyone could understand, let alone felt the same way, which led me to feel more isolated and more broken and not seek out any support because I didn't think that I could be helped. And when I decided to make it my career to help women who struggle with the exact same thing that I experienced, I obviously started sharing my story and becoming extremely vulnerable. And this truly remarkable thing started happening. Friends, family, strangers, people I encountered at social events started opening up to me and telling me that they've been feeling this way and that they resonate with everything that I talk about, and they thought that they were alone. Even just over Christmas that just passed, a family member who's been following me on social media and listening to my podcast started opening up to me about her past doing Weight Watchers and doing different diets and feeling bad in her skin and thinking that she needed to lose weight to be healthy, something that she had never talked to me about before. And so these feelings are so widespread. You're not alone. And if the biggest thing holding you back from fully committing to intuitive eating is fear, then this episode is for you. Because I want you to know that it's completely normal to be scared when you're starting this intuitive eating journey. And today we are going to talk about the most common fears that you might be experiencing, the 6 most common fears that hold people back from pursuing intuitive eating and from leaving dieting behind. So if you haven't listened to episode 3 yet, during which I broke down the 10 principles of intuitive eating, you'll definitely want to go back and give that a listen. But if you did listen, then you know that one of the key principles of improving your relationship with food is making peace with food. And that means giving yourself permission to eat quote unquote off-limit foods that you may have been afraid to eat or have spent the majority of your life trying to cut out or avoid. Things like carbs or sweets or high-calorie foods. When I work with my clients in my Food Freedom Academy group coaching program, not only do we learn how to give ourselves unconditional permission to eat those fear foods, but we also learn how to systematically work through food rules that trigger anxiety and consequently worsen disordered eating behaviors like binging, emotional eating, and food guilt. Some of these food rules include not being able to eat carbs at more than one meal, or not being allowed to eat after 8 p.m., or only eating every 3 hours or so. I mean, the list goes on, and we talk about all these different food rules in the program. But in spite of the overwhelming research that shows that deprivation leads to more overeating and the what the hell effect, that effect of, well, I've already done something bad. I've already eaten a donut, so my whole day is screwed up. I'm just going to eat all the foods and start again tomorrow, which ultimately just leads to overeating and feeling bad in your body and lethargic, and then guilt and shame. And there's just no positive outcomes that come out of guilt and shame. Although the research shows that the more you restrict, the more unhealthy your eating patterns actually are going to be, most women who have been dieting their whole lives have a lot of fear and resistance to eating what you really want. But this is such an important step, because when you don't truly believe that you can eat whatever you like, you'll continue to feel deprived. You'll continue to then overeat and not feel fully satisfied when you eat the foods that you don't really want to be eating, that which leads to overeating more and having more cravings, and the vicious cycle continues. So instead, eating just remains scary, frustrating, and without any peace or freedom. So because I don't want fear to be the thing holding you back from finding true peace and freedom around food, I want to just bring to light the 6 most common fears that I hear from the women in my community that might be holding you back, and talk through them and help you see a different perspective on how these fears are very rarely rooted in facts. So let's start with the very first fear, which is the fear that I won't stop eating, right? We have this fear that when we remove the rules, the restrictions, when we allow ourselves to eat these foods that we previously had deemed off limit, we'll end up just overeating all the time. And perhaps that's been your experience in the past. Every time you've gone off a diet, you've just kind of spiraled into overeating and eating whatever you want, whenever you want, and you're afraid that that's going to happen again. And what I want you to understand is that the only way that you're going to come to believe that you'll be able to stop eating when you're full and satisfied is to go through the experience, the eating experience, and to learn how to listen and understand your body. Now, we have a full 7-step process on how to reconnect to your body again in the program, but this isn't about just accumulating more knowledge on food and calories and portion sizes. You probably already know that stuff. You probably already know too much of that nutrition knowledge, making it nearly impossible to listen to your body. So it's very common and it's very normal that you feel like you don't know how to eat by yourself independently without tracking and without the rules. Because I want you to think about it this way. Imagine you're at a rock concert and this rock concert is extremely loud and you're trying to hear your friend who's right next to you, who's trying to tell you a story, who's trying to give you information. Of course, you're not going to be able to hear her because the rock concert is so extremely loud and overwhelming. So this is basically what it's like to try to eat by listening to your body while you're overwhelmed with rules about calories and portion sizes. And you've done all of these different diets that have given you all of these different guidelines on how you should be eating. So instead, when you're eating, you're not thinking about how to pay attention to your body. You're actually not even able to listen and understand how your body works because you're so consumed with external rules about how you should be eating. All of diet culture is so loud that you're unable to listen to your body. But instead, when you truly experience your food, when you're able to be present with it, and as I said, it's a process and it's something that you have to live through. That's why I think it's so important to get support as you do this, because otherwise you can read about intuitive eating, but that's like learning how to play soccer by reading a book on how to play soccer. You might understand it in theory. It might make a lot of sense to you. But without the practice, without facing your challenges and getting coached, it's going to keep feeling like an uphill battle and very frustrating because you can understand a concept intellectually, but to actually apply it and to live it, you'll never actually know how to play and how to be good at it. And the more you practice, the more confidence you will have. And that brings me to the second fear, which is the fear that you're addicted to food or the fear that you're addicted to sweets. If you feel like you have a sugar addiction, if your sugar cravings are out of control, if every time you have a bite of a cookie or open up a tub of ice cream, you end up head first at the bottom, then feeling out of control around food is very normal. It can feel horrible and very distressing. So understandably, you want to find a solution to this dilemma. And the rhetoric in the media is largely about sugar is basically as addictive as crack. And the popular solution that you find on Google or social media is just quit sugar. do a sugar detox. And we think that that's going to help us solve the problem. But before I get into the research about why sugar addiction is unproven and there's very limited data to show that it is a real thing, I want you to ask yourself this. Has cutting out sugar in the past really helped you have less cravings and desire for it? And I want you to also ask yourself this. The foods that you feel addicted to, are they usually the foods that you are actively trying to restrict, cut out, limit, or feel guilty when you do eat them? And I'm willing to guess that the answer is probably yes. And that is because we know that restriction leads to that desire to eat and to overeat those foods. It is not the food itself that we are addicted to. It is the restriction that causes a sense of addiction. In fact, when we talk about sugar addiction, and if you've ever done the research online, you'll probably see all of these rat studies that get quoted. And what the studies were is they took these rats, they restricted their entire food intake. So they restricted their food. They basically starved these rats. And then when they presented them with sugar, of course, these rats completely lost control, overate this sugar, and they used that reaction to the sugar to blame the substance itself and say that sugar was addictive and that these rats could not stop eating once they started. But what they failed to disclose, or what people may not understand, is that it was not the substance itself. It's that these rats were restricted of all food. Basically, these rats were restricted of fuel, of an energy source that is required for them to survive, which means that, of course, the second that they were presented with a source of energy, because sugar is one of the quickest source of energy for our bodies, they lost control and they overate, not because of the sugar itself, but because they've just gone a long time without something that they need for survival. Another reason why sugar addiction and the science behind it is flawed is because of our dopamine response. There are so many other activities that trigger dopamine, including socializing, hiking, and playing games. And the great majority of the women that I work with who struggle with binge eating and perceived sugar addictions live unbalanced lives, meaning that their other needs for socializing, for connection, for strong relationships, for self-care, and hobbies go unmet, often made worse through dieting. And as a result, these unbalanced lives deprive them of the dopamine effects, making food one of their primary and sometimes their only source of joy. And there's also a study that shows that when people listen to music, it lights up the same region of the brain as cocaine. Even just the anticipation of hearing music lights up the dopamine centers of our brain. But you don't really hear anyone talking about music addiction. And in studies done in 2008 and 2011, they prescribed binge eaters to eat their forbidden food as part of their treatment. And as a result, binge eating was significantly decreased in all of these studies. So if food addiction was a real issue, you wouldn't expect these kind of results. Food addiction theory would predict that eating more of those foods would trigger more binge eating. It would increase binge eating, yet the opposite thing happened. So if you do have a fear that there is something fundamentally genetically wrong with you, that you are addicted to sweets and that this cannot be solved, I want you to ask yourself if the foods that you feel addicted to have a history of restriction behind it. If you feel guilty for eating those foods, if there is this entire mental dilemma when you do eat those foods that trigger you to overeat them because you think, I shouldn't be doing this, so I might as well eat as much as I can now and then just cut it out again tomorrow. And that brings me to a third big fear that I hear, which is, I've tried eating these forbidden foods before and it didn't work. I still overate and I felt out of control. And this is something called pseudo permission. And we talk about this in the program, where you might have behaviorally allowed yourself the freedom to eat these foods, right? You are physically eating these foods, but you didn't truly give yourself unconditional permission to eat. So an example of that is I can have one cookie, but not more. Or I can have this meal, but I have to burn it off again tomorrow. That is not unconditional permission. Or maybe you ate with a sense of temporarily breaking the rules, but you had that little voice in your head saying that you shouldn't really be eating that. So although you might be physically eating the food, you might be emotionally depriving yourself in the future. And so the cycle perpetuates. So that's why pseudo permission does not work, and it's really just an illusion. So if you've tried doing intuitive eating on your own in the past, you've told yourself you can eat what you want, when you want, and you still felt out of control, then there's a good chance that maybe you were behaviorally or physically allowing yourself to eat these foods, but emotionally and mentally, you did not do the work to make full peace with food, to silence the internal food police, and to give yourself unconditional permission to eat. Now, I want to move on to the fourth fear, which is the fear that you will just eat junk food all the time. You won't eat or crave any healthy food because, again, perhaps that's been your experience in the past. The thing about dieting is that it makes you almost resent healthy food because it's being pushed onto you by other people. It's focusing on what you have to take out instead of what you can do to add into your life and what you can do to nourish your body. It focuses on restriction instead of addition. And as a result, I've seen so many times in my clients, they end up resenting healthy foods that previously they liked. They don't want to eat vegetables anymore. They don't want to eat salads anymore, not because they don't like them, but because it's been associated with diet culture and they have such trauma associated with those foods. But here's the thing, eating healthfully feels good. But when you believe that your opportunity to eat a certain off-limit food is now or never, so for example, you're at a birthday party and there's a chocolate cake and you never allow yourself to eat chocolate cake, or it's Christmas, we'll use the example because Christmas just passed, it's Christmas and this is kind of your free-for-all, these are the 2 weeks that you allow yourself to eat whatever you want, then the priority for health in that moment, it's not there. And it makes it more likely that you'll eat in the absence of hunger. You'll end up eating foods that you may not necessarily love. Has it happened to you that you've been eating something that is quote unquote unhealthy, and afterwards you just pause and ask yourself, why did I eat that? I didn't even enjoy that. That wasn't even that good. And chances are it's because in your brain, you had already broken the rules. You had already done something bad. And so might as well eat all of the foods that you never allow yourself to eat, whether you like it or not. And so, of course, the priority for eating foods that you enjoy that are healthy for you is not there in that moment. But by making peace with all food, with those forbidden foods, you're no longer going to overeat or have anxiety about eating it because you've given yourself permission to eat a cookie without guilt. You'll actually be able to be present with it and taste the cookie for the first time ever instead of being in your head worrying about the calories or the sugar in it. Or you might discover that it's not as good as you thought and decide that you don't want to eat it. Or you might find that it's absolutely delicious and that it only takes 1 bite or 2 bites to satisfy you. Because if you get to a point where you do feel satisfied and you do feel full, you know that you can have that cookie again tomorrow or later on, and you don't need to eat as much as you possibly can right now. And what you'll find is that when you put all foods on the same level, so a pizza and a salad are on the same level. One is not better or worse than the other. Sometimes you will crave that pizza, but sometimes your body will just really crave a nice, fresh, refreshing salad. Your intuitive eating signals will give you good advice. Because if you think about eating ice cream for every meal, how soon do you think that you'll be craving something completely opposite, like veggies or proteins in the form of chicken or eggs? When I've done a few exercises with my clients which help them really pay attention to the taste and be present for their eating experience, what I often hear is them come back and say, I had this really crazy experience this week where I was eating something where I used to feel out of control eating this food. So some examples were a Thai Express pad Thai. One of my clients, it was Twinkies. Another one was these like gummy bears that her kids had. And when they actually went through some of the exercises and the tools that I give them, what they realized is, I don't actually like this food. This food that I used to not be able to stop myself from eating, I don't actually like it or crave it because no one's telling me that I shouldn't be having this. No one is telling me that I should feel guilty or that I'm doing something wrong. So I can actually just pay attention to, do I want to be eating this? Do I enjoy the taste of this? And some of the times you'll find out that the answer is no. And similarly, the same thing will happen with healthy foods. When you actually listen and pay attention to how different foods taste and make you feel, you might find that other foods that you thought that you hated or that you resented because of your past with dieting, you really like. You might find enjoyment in salads or vegetables or fruit or all of these foods that make you feel really good and actually taste amazing. So when there's no longer the urgency to eat all the quote unquote bad foods in that moment, when there's no longer the rebellion and the resistance that comes along with being told what you can or cannot eat through dieting or programs or plans, you can actually make decisions for yourself. You can choose independently what makes you feel good or not. You can choose independently what kind of foods you are craving and if you want to honor that craving in that moment or not. And as a result, it's been shown that intuitive eaters actually eat a wider variety of food. They have healthier and better eating habits. Whereas when you're dieting, you might be able to stick to your healthy eating foods and rules for a short amount of time until eventually you hate living this way. You feel like you're deprived, you're missing out, and you'll just fall right back to the other extreme, which is overeating and binging. So moving on to the fifth fear that might be holding you back, which is the fear of failure. Probably the most common one that I see and hear from the women in my community. Now, before we get into this one, I really need to validate this fear. This fear holds a lot of people back from starting their intuitive eating journey. And before diving into why this is so common, I want you to reflect on this. How many years have you been dieting? How many years have you been stuck in a cycle of healthy eating, restriction, dieting, and then binging, followed by feeling out of control, guilt, and shame? It's likely that you've been dieting or entrenched in the diet mentality for many years, maybe even the majority of your life. And this is a shared experience amongst most of my Food Freedom Academy members. Because of the years that you've spent in diet culture, it has probably become all that you know. It's your normal. You have experience in counting calories and macros, limiting your portion sizes, or trying different fad diets. The experience that you have within diet culture is ingrained in your neural pathways in your brain. And it's everywhere around you. It's on your social media. It's people in your family, your friends. People are talking about it at work. So talking about switching from years of dieting to starting intuitive eating, it can be a really scary thought to work through. And I want you to think of it this way. Imagine you had a lot of experience playing guitar. So imagine that you've been playing guitar for as long as you've been dieting. So say you've been dieting for 10 years. So you've been playing guitar for 10 years. Or 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, whatever it is, whatever portrays your experience with dieting. And if you had all of those years spent playing guitar, you would probably be really good at it, right? Depending on the amount of years that you've been in diet culture, you could be considered a professional at it. So you've had X years of strict dieting that has made you feel like you were in control. So it makes a lot of sense to feel like it would be a failure to walk away. And there might be part of you that believes that you haven't solved it yet, that you haven't found the diet that works for you. You might also feel like you failed because you never really achieved what the diets have promised you. Weight loss, better health, confidence, happiness, all those false promises that diet culture tells you to keep you coming back. You might also feel like a failure because even though you've been able to lose the weight, you've always failed to keep it off. So you may look back with rose-colored glasses on all of those diets that you've done and think that they've quote unquote worked because you managed to lose the weight temporarily, and then feel and blame yourself for failing to stick to it for long enough. When really, in reality, you have to know that you haven't failed at dieting. Dieting has failed you. Diets are, by nature, unsustainable and not meant to be a forever, quote unquote, fix. Imagine going to a doctor, having him prescribe to you a pill that's supposed to help you lose weight and improve your health markers like cholesterol and blood pressure, whatever it is. But this pill had a 95% failure rate, and it is not regulated by any agencies. Anyone can kind of prescribe this pill. And it also comes with side effects like food obsession, increased risk of eating disorders, binging, and a whole slew of mental health side effects. I would hope that common sense would tell you not to take this pill. You'd probably understand that this pill won't solve the root cause of your eating issues that got you to where you are in the first place. And you would probably understand as well that you cannot take this pill for the rest of your life. But imagine if you did, for some reason, decided to take that chance and take the pill, and the pill didn't work. Would you feel like you failed the pill? Or would you objectively be able to look at that situation and factually understand why this may have not worked? And also look at the statistics, knowing that 95% of the time this pill does not work and comes with those side effects. Because research tells us that 2/3 of dieters are going to gain back more weight than they originally lost. And if you can relate to that statistic, know that it's your body working properly. This loops back to your metabolism and how our bodies function on a physiology level. Dieting makes our brain and body interpret our eating patterns as starvation. Coming off of a diet, it is normal to binge and feel out of control around food and to believe that you have failed at something that is an impossible thing to begin with, because this entire process is a product of the diet. So I want you to repeat to yourself, there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with your body. You are not a failure for not being able to figure this out or make this work. If you need, put a reminder on your phone, write a sticky note in your bathroom, put it on your car, on your laptop, whatever you feel like you need to do to remind yourself that you have not failed at this, you are not a failure, and that dieting was never meant to work in the first place. Diet culture makes you feel like there's something wrong with you and your body, and this idea can be ingrained into our brains and our neural pathways, and especially if you've been doing this for over 2, 3, 5 years, this is going to be very deeply ingrained in your subconscious. Our experience with dieting has taught us not to trust or listen to our bodies, and that has influenced just about every decision that you make about food, about body, about your body image, about exercise, and so much more about your daily habits. And I want to validate that if you have felt a fear of failure, of letting go, of losing control, know that this is very normal, but that the reason is because you have so much experience with dieting. I often like to have interviews with Food Freedom Academy members a couple of months after they finish the program. And I was talking to one of my members, and one thing that she had said was, after having gone through the process and looking back on her history with dieting, what she said was she was terrified before starting the program of letting go of that control, because she used to count every single calorie. She had all of these strict rules about what she could or couldn't eat. And she thought, well, when I let go of that control, of course I'm going to be out of that control. And what she now knows, looking back on it, is it was a false sense of control. Because I want you to reflect on your own experience. Do you really feel like the more you've dieted over time, like you've been more in control around food? Or do you feel like the more you try to control your food, the more out of control you feel? And to flip the switch and say that you're going to do intuitive eating is probably going to feel scary. For some, it might feel like a relief when you go to this other world of intuitive eating where weight loss is not the goal. It can be scary. And I want to challenge your belief systems. I want you to reflect on some of these questions. If you can, take out a pen and a piece of paper. I want you to ask yourself, number one, has dieting really worked for you long term? And what is your definition of working, right? Because think back on how you felt while you were dieting. Was your entire life revolving around food? Were you giving up a bunch of things that you loved? Were you sacrificing your mental health and your social health in the process? And did it really allow you to change your lifestyle and do something sustainable and genuinely healthy for yourself? Or did it always repeat the same pattern of working short term because you inevitably couldn't stick to it and fell back into your old habits, or even worse? Think of the experience that you've had with dieting. Do you want to still be living this way at 60, 70, 80 years old? How many more years do you want to spend in diet culture? Think of adding on as many years as you've already spent in it. So that fear of failure is so incredibly common and it's normal, but diet culture and dieting has already burned you once, right? It's burned you for 5, 10, 20 years. It's robbed you of so much life. But to hold yourself back from doing something completely different, from trying something new, something uncommon to you because of that fear of failing yet again, is basically allowing diet culture to burn you again and to keep burning you time and time again until you decide that enough is enough. And that brings me to the last fear that might be holding you back, which is the root cause of all the other fears. And it's that fear of weight gain. You might think that it's too scary to try to give up control of your weight. You might think, what if I hate my body even more after I start intuitive eating? I'd rather lose weight first and then I'll heal my relationship with food. The fear of weight gain is such a common barrier to starting intuitive eating, and it makes a lot of sense. You've likely devoted a lot of time and energy to changing or manipulating your body for the sake of weight loss. And finally, releasing control over what happens to your weight with intuitive eating can feel like you're throwing in the towel or quote unquote letting yourself go, and you're not alone. In fact, if these feelings and these anxieties are coming up for you, you're on the right track. We live in a society where the desire to be thin and have a body that is deemed quote unquote worthy is deeply ingrained in us. We are exposed to weight-centric and fat-phobic messages every single day, and this is very real. And we live in a society that has internalized weight stigma that you might not even be aware of. And so diet culture is constantly trying to sell you lies, telling you that you can control your weight and that you should. So when you fail to control your weight or manipulate the size of your body, you are made to believe that you're lazy or that you're a failure. Maybe you had a parent who put you on a diet as a child, a doctor who prescribed to you weight loss advice, the clothing store that didn't carry your size, or negative comments expressed about your body weight. So I want to take a moment to validate your experience and acknowledge the reality that thin privilege is. And I can't speak directly to the experience of those in larger bodies who are constantly being mistreated because of their body size. But I know that I can continue to do my work to bring attention and fairness to these issues. But we have to also understand the science behind it. What we talk about in the Food Freedom Academy is the set point weight theory. And it's understanding that your body has a predetermined set point weight. That is your personal, healthy, and normal weight that you can maintain effortlessly without restricting and without over exercising. And you have very little control over your genetics. And that can be a relief and the catalyst for ending the constant fight and the constant war against your body. Just like you have a unique shoe size, eye color, height, you have an individual size, shape, and weight too. Your body has already chosen a weight range that is the healthiest and the most optimal for you. And actually, what we know about dieting is that the more you diet, the higher your set point weight gets. So if you've noticed that with every new diet, you gain that weight back and then some, you find it harder and harder to maintain the weight that you used to be at. So although I do completely understand that fear of weight gain, I want you to just remember that dieting is one of the biggest predictors of long-term weight gain, and that the more you diet, the more you restrict, the more likely you actually are to overeat, to struggle with uncontrollable cravings, to binge, which will just inevitably lead to more weight gain in the long run. So to recap, the 6 top fears that I see that might be holding you back from fully committing to intuitive eating and healing your relationship with food in your body. The fear that you won't stop eating, the fear that you're addicted to food or to sweets, that you've tried eating forbidden foods before, but it didn't work, that you'll just overeat and feel out of control, that you won't eat healthfully, that you won't crave healthy foods and you'll only eat quote unquote junk food, the fear of failure, and finally, the fear of weight gain. Now, it's not my job to tell you that you cannot or shouldn't diet. You have your own body autonomy and you can make your own decisions. And I am here to give you as much knowledge and research so that you can make informed decisions for yourself. But I can promise you one thing that all of my clients have shared, whether they were 20 years old or 70 years old. And it's that they all wish that they had started intuitive eating earlier. No matter what their age or their experience with dieting, they wish that they had started intuitive eating earlier. And I want you to let that sink in and reflect on it, because this is something that all of my clients wish that they could change from their past. And this is something that you can control for your future. You're able to choose to continue dieting or to walk a new path. And this is where intuitive eating comes in. It is an evidence-based, structured form of self-care eating that will allow you to trust your body again, to make peace with food, and to develop a pleasurable, sustainable, consistent, and balanced way of eating that is rooted in self-care and compassion. So if you want to change the path of your future, if you don't want to live with any more regret, wishing that you had found intuitive eating earlier, then I really encourage you to sign up for my 7-day intuitive eating challenge. Again, you can find the link in my show notes, sabrinamagnan.com/challenge, where I'm going to hold your hand, be there to support you through the very first steps that you need to start implementing intuitive eating into your own life and leave dieting behind once and for all. So I hope that this was really helpful for you. I hope it opened your eyes to a new perspective on how to handle these fears that might be holding you back. And of course, if this was helpful, share this with a friend, share the challenge with a friend. The more, the merrier. I'm so excited to see you on the inside. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you on next week's episode. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram at Sabrina Magnan Health for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram at Sabrina Magnan Health for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode.